This is our subcommittee's first meeting of the year, and I look forward to continuing our tradition of working in a bipartisan manner this year. Ranking Member Hirono, thank you for your continued leadership. She and I visited the Hawaii facilities last year, and she's been a stalwart with regard to the Navy and the Navy requirements. We welcome our three distinguished witnesses, the Honorable James F. Gertz, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Vice Admiral James W. Kilby, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfighting Requirements and Capabilities. Lieutenant General Eric M. Smith, Deputy Commandant of the Marine Corps for Combat Development and Integration. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your service and for being here today. Today, the world is more dangerous than any time in my lifetime. I agree with the National Defense Strategy that today we're facing 5 key threats across 5 domains: China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and global terrorism has not abated. The domains used to be land, air, and sea. Today, we have to be prepared to compete in land, air, sea, cyber, and space. As we speak, our country's adversaries are plotting to undermine us, overtake us, and in some cases eliminate our very way of life. Our military remains the envy of the world, but the competition is picking up, and we cannot be complacent. Thanks to President Trump's leadership, we reset defense spending in 2017, and we're beginning to rebuild the military after many years of delay. But the hole is deep. Work has just begun. I commend our witnesses for submitting a budget that continues the trend of better funding the readiness accounts that support today's Navy and Marine Corps. In 2016, the Navy increased its minimum requirement to 355 battle force ships. In reflection of the strategic shift to great power competition, today the Navy stands at 295 battle force ships, and we have a chart to illustrate where we are today. The blue line is from the FY20 plan to 355 ships. And so if you look at where we are today, in the year 2021, that gets us to 305. And after that, we don't have a plan today. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So there's a dramatic shortfall if we take the status quo today. Now, I know nobody's suggesting that today, but we do have a situation where we really don't have the updated shipbuilding plan from the Department of Defense. It appears to me that the Department of Navy's proposed budget is sufficient to support a fleet of about 300 ships today. The budget proposal for fiscal years 21 through 25 does not keep pace with inflation, which means that growing the Navy much at all, much less to the 355 ships we need to meet all the threats we face, is financially unrealistic. An example of the financial challenge is 10 fewer ships are planned for procurement in fiscal years 2021 through 2025 as compared to just last year, including 1 less Virginia-class submarine in fiscal year 2021. I find this situation personally unacceptable, given the NDS requirements and what we know our adversaries are doing. I believe the need for a larger, more capable fleet is clear. I think it's time we rethink how we fund our Navy and shipbuilding enterprise. Today, we spend roughly $750 billion on our military. Each department of the military gets roughly 1/3 of what's left after we put 14% away for overhead. So that means that the 3 major services get a third, a third, a third. I'm personally not confident that that is consistent with the NDS, particularly with the NDS's requirement to face up to the growing threat from what China is doing in the Indo-Pacific region. Our current national defense strategy is a maritime strategy for sure. As former Secretary Mattis stated, I'm skeptical that the current 1/3 funding level for the Department of the Navy is enough to meet that goal. If we're to remain the global leader above, on, and under the seas, we must get serious about building the fleet we need. To this end, I believe many promising initiatives are contained in the Ships Implementation Act that Senator Wicker introduced last month. I look forward to working with Senator Wicker and Senator Hirono on the proposal for this year's NDAA. Options to improve industrial base stability and fund the Columbia-class submarine program, at least partly, outside of the Navy's budget deserve serious consideration. However, it's difficult to have a discussion on the future fleet, including the associated costs and schedules, without a 30-year shipbuilding plan, which by law was required to be submitted to Congress with the budget last month. In addition, I understand the Department has been reassessing the fleet size requirement over the past 2 years. Based on earlier comments from Navy leaders, I expected this review to be completed by late in 2019. Without it, this subcommittee will struggle to understand just how new platforms are envisioned to integrate into the fleet. Which brings me to China, and we've all had individual conversations about this. I'm going to show one more chart, and I think this highlights the issue. The problem is, this is not quality-quantity conversation. We're the 800-pound gorilla below the seas, we know that. Above the seas, we've got a great 230-year tradition, but we're not large enough. China right now, fleet is on a very different trajectory from ours, as you can see. China is the red line above. This is on public declassified numbers. The blue chart here, the blue line, it was our 16 plan to get to 355 by 2034, 14 years from now. China will end up north of 450 roughly. So the old concept of that our quality is better than theirs, we can fight our ships better than they can, that may be well true. But at some point in time, quantity actually begins to win out. The Chinese currently have 350 battle force ships and are projected to have 425 by 2030. In contrast, last year's shipbuilding plan showed our Navy on the path to reach 355 by 2034. There's no shipbuilding plan this year in the budget document yet, and the budget documents reflect the fleet size of only about 306 ships. So we're sitting today at 350 for China and 306 for the United States Navy. Gentlemen, I know you're in uniform and you're a responsible secretary, and I know you share this opinion. That is totally unacceptable. There is no way, given the fact that we not only have responsibilities in the Indo-Pacific region, but our Navy is required to be around the world today. We need allies' help, and we need a serious rethink about what we're asking our Navy to do within the NDS as it relates particularly to China in this one chart. If we look at what Russia's doing with their submarines today, it adds even more complexity to this conversation. I would observe shipbuilding and fleet size trends, and therefore the Navy, to some extent, seem to be going in reverse in this budget request as compared to the Department's previous plans. The Department of Defense needs to be clear with Congress and the American people. I'm saying Department of Defense. This isn't just a Navy problem. It's a Department of Defense issue. And the American people about the threats and their proposed plans. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to provide, and I quote, provide and maintain a Navy. And we've always done a good job of that. It is the Department's responsibility to give us the information we need to carry out this duty, and that is not currently happening yet. We're also hearing about affordability and the best balance of resources in hearings this year. I applaud that effort to adequately fund personnel, maintenance, and other supporting functions. However, we can't lose sight of the fact that the Navy must be bigger, we must get bigger, and we must find a way to pay for it. Because if we don't, make no mistake, the Chinese will only accelerate the expansion of their maritime influence around the globe, creating fair fait accompli dilemmas at every turn, which come at the expense of U.S. interests and those of our partners and allies. The stakes are real. Combine that with BRI and Made in China 2025, the ports that they have these proprietary loans in South America and all over Africa, we have to be able to identify that threat as real today. So the subcommittee will continue to work with the Navy and Marine Corps to build a larger, more capable and flexible fleet, while at the same time demanding the best use of every taxpayer dollar. I look forward to our witnesses' testimony today and the answers to our questions. I now recognize Senator Hirono, our ranking member.